Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Donation. I am your host, Matt Bitzegaio, and I am joined by my co-host, Noah Barnett. Noah, how are you today?
Doing well. Yeah. I just got back from the nonprofit storytelling conference that was hosted in San Diego. Shout out to the team at Better Fundraising. They always put on an incredible conference. So I feel really engaged. A lot of times we spend so much time working remotely, but like being in person and being able to rub shoulders with fundraisers and leaders that are navigating problems, like I feel a little inspired. I'm not going to lie.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited today for our conversation, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of a hot topic in the world today, not just within the technology sphere, but just talk a little bit about AI and kind of how we see that impacting the sector that we serve. So I'm excited for that. And yeah, glad to hear that it was a good event for you last week. It's always good to be able to come back from something like that and be ready to rock and roll and be excited.
Yeah. And I think this topic is actually really timely coming off of an in-person conference where we were talking about storytelling, because the whole time there, it was how do we actually better connect with our supporters through the power of stories, through the power of impact, because this is getting more and more difficult for nonprofits to do, because the challenge of attention and capturing attention is just really, really hard right now to really keep and capture the attention of your supporters. And in part, that's not just due to AI, but I think there is this element that comes into play of like, how is AI coming alongside us to support our stewardship efforts versus try to like replace them or change them or, offload staff and all these different things. So there's all these like worries and concerns. And so I came back really excited to kind of talk about this within our team and kind of want to just get your opinion on this, Matt. You've been a technologist for a long time. You've helped really build and kind of define the strategy alongside Andrew of how we're building technology, and most recently helped us launch Otto. And so what's your take on this? Like, how should we as leaders, but more importantly, our audience of leaders of nonprofits, be thinking about AI as we close out 2025 and plan for next year?
It is a really interesting topic for sure. And in my almost 25 years of working with technology and being, a technology professional, probably one of the most disruptive technologies that I've ever kind of seen. And things are really moving fast and they're changing quickly. But I think with it, there's a huge opportunity. I think in some ways it can create a lot of anxiety for people from lots of different angles. I think like are we adopting these things fast enough? Are we doing it the right way? Are we using these tools the way we should be? Is this going to replace my job? Is it, like all of these things that are so much unknowns, really, I think for a lot of people right now.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting because it's changing like how you think about solving problems. Like we were in a very interesting meeting yesterday for our own internal uses, and it was kind of pushing on this idea that like, how do you think about building systems? We've talked about on this before, where like systems are actually like how your people, your processes, and your technology like work together to execute your strategy. And I think now that we're coming back and really looking at our systems and saying, with the advent of AI and accessibility, it's changing the dynamic from like, what can we do versus like, what problems are we trying to solve? And then how do we back into that? And so I agree with you. It's the conversations I've had with people in the sector about AI are kind of all over the place. It's like you said, it's the most revolutionary thing, or people are so excited about it. And they're like, I can be so much more effective and actually get more of my time back. Others, I don't know if I'm going to have a job, going forward. Others are like, hey, this is not a good thing. There's like other issues and challenges there. And so it's a very all over the place. And I think that's created,
environmental impacts.
That's created that anxiety, Yeah.
Well,
for sure.
And frankly, Noah, like from my perspective, there's also just a ton of hype around it that like trying to separate the hype from the reality, I think can be really difficult. And I look at it, we've talked, you and I have talked before very recently. There's all this information out there about how AI is going to kind of replace software for us in the way we think of software today, for example. And I think when you think about that, it's like, these large for-profit corporations are going to be able to kind of replace things they've traditionally used, more traditional software, with solutions they build themselves based on or using AI. We talk about that and we think about that, and then I try and put that in the context of the nonprofit sector, and I think it might create this feeling within the nonprofit sector, like, gosh, do we need to be like, are we behind? Do we need to be doing that? And I think that when I look at that, one of the things that really stands out to me is the difference in so many ways between like who we serve. So like that small to mid-size nonprofit compared to the places that you're hearing these kind of stories coming from, and our ability in a small to mid-sized nonprofit to go build our own agentic AI solution, or, and I think that really, to me, then leads me back to this belief that, especially for the sector and the audience, like that companies like DonorDock are serving, a lot of that still is going to land on us to be able to help put those tools in place. I posted last week on LinkedIn just kind of some of my thoughts around AI, and just the idea that like AI shouldn't sit next to your work, but like should live inside of it. And that's, trying to kind of unpack that a little bit. That actually to me is like the crux of what I'm talking about there. Is we know that there's certain workflows and processes and things that need to happen within these nonprofits. And then where I see real excitement and value is like, how can we utilize AI to like make those things easier, faster, take less resources, so that we can then focus our resources more on things like telling authentic stories, building human to human relationships with donors, things that a robot or that the computer can't do for us. And that's what gets me pretty excited about it. And even in my own life and my own workflow, using those tools to be able to do some of the busy work, so to speak, and giving me more time to free up my brain for thinking about other problems, other things that we need to solve, or like I said, building human relationships. Like, it's pretty cool and it's pretty exciting. But again, a lot of hype and a lot of anxiety, I think, for a lot of people around this topic, for sure.
And I think that's what we want to kind of dissect, right? Like we said, agentic AI, like we just said all these things. And I think that's what is overwhelming. It's like, I don't even know what half these things are. I was meeting with a nonprofit last week that was just feeling overwhelmed just by the work that needed to get done today, let alone the work that needed to get done tomorrow. And I think that's a common feeling that we hear from our customers. You listening to this might feel that way, where it's like, I just want to focus on what matters most right now, and like, I'm not sure how AI fits into that and where that's going. And so we really want to spend some time kind of like slowing down the conversation and even providing you as leaders some questions that you might begin to ask yourself, maybe workshop with your team or your board, and just kind of incorporate in your planning as it relates to AI. And so that's what we're hopeful to give you by the end of this. But one thing I think is so insightful about your post and what kind of prompted me to say, hey, we should focus on this today, was this idea that AI isn't necessarily like a sidekick or a magic wand or a separate tool, but it truly is almost like a superpower, like embedded in you. Like, I'm not a Marvel fan, but it's like, instead of it being like Harry Potter style, where I got a wand and I can do magical tricks with it, and if I don't have my wand, I can't do magic. It's more of like this kind of infused like superpower that can really help you just like amplify the work and the quality of work that you get to do, because it gets to kind of assist you in things that you want to do, but maybe you just don't have time to do, or you haven't had the capacity to move from, that one donor meeting to the next donor meeting and context switch, but it can surface all the insights you need, or it can remember all the things that happened in that meeting, or maybe you can just spend more of your energy on other parts of that. And so can you, like, practically, what does that look like for us at DonorDock? Like, as we've been thinking about embedding or kind of weaving in AI into our tooling, how has this belief that it should be inside versus next to practically shaped? Like, what does that even look like for someone that's like, what does that even mean?
Well, I think so you're right on. Like, a lot of the AI tools that are out there today they kind of behave like an adjacent assistant, right? So like, even the way that these kind of early tools are being marketed, like a co-pilot. Like it's like it's kind of over here, kind of helping, but it's kind of this adjacent assistant. So it can be helpful, but in a lot of cases, it really is separate from the work that you're doing. And so what that leads to is disjointed focus. Like I have to stop what I'm doing right now to go ask this thing for help. And then I got to translate the answer back into the tool I was working in originally. And I feel like that creates friction that limits my ability to have the AI really deliver like transformational value. And so that's what we were thinking about. So like even when we started working on Otto, and again, Otto is kind of that intelligent layer inside. It's built into DonorDock and it uses AI to help us within the product. Because I think what we were seeing was a lot of people go buy a Chat GPT account and they're over here working in their CRM. And then they're like, okay, I need help writing an email. I got to go over here to this other tool and try and regurgitate a bunch of stuff so it knows what I'm trying to figure out and how to help me. And then it's going to spit something out and I'm going to go back and forth with that. And then I'm going to have to take that and go back over here and try and use what it's spat out to me. It just felt very disjointed. When AI lives inside the tools that we're working within or that we work within daily, one of the biggest things I think is a key here is context. So by having it inside the tool, the AI layer has context around what I'm already working on. And so I'm not having to like go over here and manually give it a bunch of context to try and give it enough information to be helpful. It already has that. It can help.
And practically for this, it's like if you're in DonorDock, you're doing donor stewardship or donor management, or you're trying to raise money and do fundraising. And it's you don't have to tell it that. It already knows that that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Because
and has
it's
the context
inside of this container.
And has the context to the data you're working with, and that you're working on. And so now it can start to anticipate things that might be helpful. So for example, we have our donor summary that you can go to the donors page, and it's rather than you having to dig through a bunch of old notes and activities to try and understand the relationship, there's a simple paragraph or two that really outlines the relationship because it has the context. And it outlines it in terms of your organization, not just like a general, this is very much about the relationship. So it starts to fill those gaps automatically instead of me having to say, I want to know more about this data. Let me copy and paste a bunch of information, put it over here. And that says nothing about the security side of that, which we don't have to, but I mean, that's just another, we don't have to get into that. But again, just another anxiety piece, right? Of like, is this even secure for me to do this? Can I do this? But I think it helps also just kind of eliminate repetitive work and repetitive decisions and really lets us as humans focus on that uniquely human work, like using my judgment, using my creativity. And then again, in the realm of what we're doing, like building relationships. And I think so that shift from AI as a tool that sits over here to AI as an operating layer within the tools I'm using, like that's where I think it starts to get really, really powerful and why we chose to build Otto the way that we did.
And I keep coming back to this, but that woven in application is less about AI, because AI is just like a advancement, right? But like AI in of itself isn't the solution. It's the intelligence that AI can provide that helps you do better work or kind of focus on what matters most, all of those different things. So it's really that like translation of AI for the outcome of intelligence, which improves quality and the intention that you're having with your supporters, which is what we're focused on.
Yep.
So I want to kind of pivot into that, which is like the leadership lens. So we've talked about the complexity of AI and then kind of how we've been thinking about it here at DonorDock, and have now built that into our all-in-one CRM solution. But if I'm a leader sitting here and I'm like, I'm using it, I'm dabbling with it. I think 96% of people surveyed in a recent survey have like dabbled with AI in some way. And so there's this summary that like basically most people are AI aware at this point, especially if you're in a professional work environment, or at least have dabbled with it. But as far as being applying or AI applying is not necessarily there. So let's say we're talking to that person who's like, hey, I'm aware of it. I might dabble with a little bit. I use ChatGPT or Claude or one of these other models. But like, I keep being told that, we should be really thinking about how we can use AI to better myself, but better my team. Where do I start? Like, how do I even begin thinking about that? Because, my board's saying, hey, how are we using AI to improve our efficiency as a nonprofit? My team might be like, hey, I used AI to do this cool thing. Like, I might be like, just kind of like, I'm not sure where to start. And so what are maybe some grounding questions that someone could use, or maybe even just some practical advice for that leader who's, ready to take the next step?
Well, I think one thing that I would think about a lot is maybe start by trying to take an inventory of what is being used today. Because I think one thing that you would find is that you may have things being done or used or tools that you don't even know across your team. So unless you've had some sort of, AI discussion and policy or whatever within your organization, you may find that you've dabbled with 2 or 3 tools, and that you have team members who are dabbling with 2 or 3 other tools. And so there's like this smattering of different AI things, nothing connected and nothing governed. I think that's the other interesting part, is like, is this being governed within what we consider to be okay within our organization in terms of how we do things? And so I would start there. I would start with like, what is being used? Are there team members who are using AI? What tools are they using? Are they paying for their own accounts? Are they doing it in a way that works for us? And so, they're the nonprofit AI. They have their event each year. A lot of really good resources out there around usage of AI within nonprofits. They have some really, really strong resources, like sample AI policies that you can kind of adopt within your organization. And those can give you a really good starting point of the things you need to be thinking about as a leader within a nonprofit when it comes to AI. And so take that inventory, find out what is being used, go and try, and even if it's a simple policy, document some type of policy around AI usage within your organization. And again, great starting points out there that are free. They're available for you to use, because you really do need to have some governance around this. Like, there are a lot of security implications and people's information. We deal with donor information like all the time as nonprofit employees, nonprofit leaders. And so ensuring that the team understands how to steward that information in a secure way, and what's okay to share with an AI and what's not okay. Like these are all things that you don't have to start from scratch. And I think that's what's great, is like, there's a lot of resources out there that can help you have that starting point and be able to, start building these things out within your organization. I don't think they have to take a lot of time, and I don't think they have to be overly complex, but I do think taking the time to at least have a basic understanding of what's being used, a policy around what's okay to be used, and then you can start to think about how can we as an organization align on a tool or tools that we believe will help us find additional efficiency, be able to focus more time on those uniquely human things and less time on things that the AI can help us with. And so now that policy helps you to start to move towards that, where we're all on the same page, we're all using the same tool or tools, and we have an understanding of what is okay within this organization and what isn't.
And I think more boards are going to be surfacing these questions, because as AI becomes more ubiquitous in use and the exposure comes that everyone's using kind of their own personal tools, it was almost like the cell phone policies. Like, do you use your own cell phone at work, or do you use a company phone? And like, we kind of went through that whole phase. This is almost kind of another step in that direction, because again, it could involve sensitive organization data or donor data, and you just want to be able to be prepared for that. So I think using something like the Fundraising AI Institute, I believe it's called, or other references there, and we'll include some of the links in the show notes, can be super helpful. The second thing I heard you say, which I thought was really practical, is having an open honest conversation of like, how are we all using it today? Even if there's only 2 or 3 of you, having a 30-minute conversation to just drive awareness across the team of like, how are you using it today? And I think there could be some like maybe shame or kind of like, oh, well, I'm using it this way, or I'm not really sure how I use it. Because again, these are all experimental and we're all trying to just figure out the best way to use them. But I think kind of creating that space where you can say, hey, here's what I found and here's how I'm using it today. I'm not sure if that's the best way, but this is what I've done, can really create and invite that collaborative spirit amongst the people within your team. Even if you're the only person in fundraising, maybe someone on the accounting team or the operations team is using that too, or the program staff, and there can be shared learnings there. Yeah. So starting there, I think going secondarily to that is, what are others in your industry doing? So having this conversation and saying, hey, other executive director or development director, like, how are you all using AI today? What are some of the practical use cases that you've brought into your workloads? What does that even look like? Is it writing all your appeal letters? I hope not, but like, it might be helping to support and refine or to condense different impact stories into ways. It can be a great testing partner, I've found, where you can say, hey, here's the email I'm writing. How would you respond to this? And give me feedback. So it's almost like a testing thing where I can kind of pitch at something and say, hey, give me feedback, both positive and negative, on how I might refine this or better accomplish the goal I'm having in communicating to this partner. Or in this case, maybe it's a corporate sponsor you're trying to pitch. Like, pretend you're the corporate sponsor and how would you respond? So it's a good coaching partner as well. But I think asking others how they're using it can be a great way to learn.
And I think through that, you will uncover things you've never even considered or thought of as something that you may be able to use the tool to do, that somebody else is doing. And again, it's never crossed your mind, oh, that could save me a lot of time. So I think there's a lot of learning that can happen through that for sure.
I think once it goes beyond like the awareness phase of like, okay, this is definitely a real thing. It's something we need to begin talking to. I think at the beginning of 2025, it was like, is this going to be a real thing? I think now we realize like it's very much everywhere, and it's an opportunity to learn something new, to be able to really enhance your work. Second thing is kind of just saying, okay, how do we want to use this and what do we feel is appropriate for us in our organization? Maybe it's a simple policy, maybe it's a conversation with the board. Keep it very high level, but making sure you're at least talking about the constraints for how you want to use it. I think it then comes down to, where should you begin like looking for ways to use AI? And I think this starts getting into that systems level, which is like, okay, is there ways that AI can simplify processes or help update processes? Maybe we've always done a process one way, and there's an opportunity to maybe rewrite a process. Or how can AI help our people? And then ultimately, too, how do we need to really look at our tools and technology that we have and say, hey, is there ways that we need to be considering replacing things with AI enabled or AI woven in experience or tools, because we don't want to have just more and more tools. So how would you approach that if you were advising a leader, Matt? Like, what questions might you be asking with them on where they could identify maybe the first 2 or 3 ways that they could apply AI in 2026?
I think I'd start by really trying to understand the processes that we as a team are spending time on. And so again, we say these things, and I don't want people to misinterpret that I'm saying go take 3 weeks and document down to every step, every process that you have within your organization. That's really not it. I'm just saying, start to try and understand the different tools that you're using within your organization, and then what processes those tools support. And because to your point, like, the future of productivity to me isn't about adding more tools. It's actually about reducing like the mental load that you have for the things you're trying to get done, to free up time for these other things that you can spend your mental load on. And so what processes are in place today? Like, what are we doing? What are the workflows that we're following? And then at a high level within those processes or those workflows, are there things that we believe that generative AI or these AI tools, whether it's a separate tool that you're using, whether it's built in or baked into other tools that you're using, but are there areas where those AI layers can help to automate some of the things that we are maybe doing manually today? Maybe good examples, like instead of me having to read a donor's profile and look at all the old notes and things like that, how can it help me understand what's going on with this donor more easily and more quickly?
Mm-hmm.
How can it help us classify our donations and our donors based on the data that's coming in automatically, tagging things properly, and so forth? How do I, instead of switching tabs to look at different reports and different things, how can it surface the insights that are helpful to me as I'm working? And so we're taking this kind of catalog of workflows and processes, and we're looking for those areas where we can inject these tools in, or maybe there's already something that's out there for us to use, kind of already built to do what we're trying to do with these tools. And we're trying to find practical places where they can remove some of that mental load and manual work within these workflows that we're doing. And so then that's our blueprint to say, our first attempt at using AI in a practical and efficient way is that we want to replace these 4 things across these 2 workflows with AI so that we can save ourselves whatever amount of time every week we believe those pieces of the processes take. And so that to me feels like a very simple, approachable, practical way to start to dip our toe in a little bit with AI and start to see real value from it in a way that's not overwhelming. And then we can build from there. So we can continue on. If we see success there, we can just kind of redo that process or go through that process again, looking for those areas where it can help us. And it's actually something we're talking about doing within DonorDock right now, looking at all the core strategies of our business and strategy areas and saying, where can we get more efficiency through using not just AI, but that being a piece of the puzzle for sure. And so it feels very practical to me as a way to kind of get started with it.
Yeah. And it kind of reminds me of a framework that I've been trying to orient around, which I'll just call the 3 E's framework. And we've kind of keep coming back to efficiency. And I think that's the first place you go to, which is how can AI drive efficiency? How can it make me work better? How can it kind of offload maybe repetitive tasks? How can it make processes better? And so there's this idea of if I was kind of drawing on the whiteboard or even on a blank white piece of paper, where are there efficiencies that we want to capture, and where are there inefficiencies that we know we felt as a team or as an individual that maybe I can at least ask the question, even if there isn't, could AI support me here? Could AI help me be more efficient in my workflow on a weekly basis, on a daily basis? Could this make my team more efficient? Could this make our organization more efficient? I think a lot of people stop there because they see it as a way to basically save time or do more. And I think what we would encourage is to go to the other 2 buckets, the second being effectiveness. Can I actually improve the effectiveness or the efficacy, to use another word, of my outputs? And so, for example, if I'm meeting with a donor, one thing that's extremely helpful is if I have full insights and context of the entire donor's history before I meet with that donor. And now AI can do that, like you mentioned with our donor summaries. Or you can even ask Otto and say, hey, I'm meeting with Matt today. Can you please provide me an executive summary on everything that Matt's done with our organization so that I can feel informed, and then I can actually increase the level of care and kind of appreciation and kind of celebration of you as a supporter as I'm meeting with you, but also maybe invite you into things that are more appropriate for you as an individual versus someone else. I think this goes not only in one-to-one meetings or phone calls, but even into thank you notes, into emails, into letters, etc. It's not just about efficiency, do this letter for me. It's how can I actually improve the effectiveness of this effort? And so I think that's the second bucket. The third bucket that I would kind of go down, which is more of an expansion bucket, which is how do I actually expand what I'm not thinking about? And so one practical way I've seen people do this is basically saying, hey, here's the last 6 months of donor communication that we've sent. What are the themes and highlights that we keep coming back to? But what's missing? Where are there gaps in how we're telling our story? Do we actually not even realize that we continually beat the same drum over and over and over again, yet miss the point that we've forgotten that there are other aspects of our work that we just cognitively didn't even realize we're not sharing about the incredible work doing over here? Or could we take feedback from donors and actually feed it in and give an objective analysis of that data and say, hey, here's all the feedback we've gotten on a recent survey. Can you give us feedback on the themes and reasons that people are supporting our organization, or what they care about? Or maybe after a volunteer experience, we get all these stories and we use some of them in our impact reports, but we're really not diving deep into them to find, again, net new things that we might be missing in our work. And there's opportunities for expansion with AI if we're willing to allow it to be kind of a coach or analyst to the work we're doing. And that's similar to what I shared a few minutes earlier, which is like, hey, here's the pitch I'm going to send to A, B, and C partner. How would you respond to this? What am I missing? What objections are you going to have? How do I pre-approach objections? Where are my biases embedded in here, et cetera? And it can kind of be that expansion partner, not just an efficiency or an effectiveness partner. And so hopefully those 3 E's are helpful as you're kind of thinking through these opportunity areas. But again, you can just start small. And I think that's the big opportunity with AI too. I don't know if you've seen this, Matt, but it's like, just try stuff. Like, it actually almost benefits the tinkerer, where we have to kind of go back and be childlike, where it's like, I'm just going to see what happens if I start trying to like do this or do that, or ask it for feedback on this. Or if I give it this, what does it make out of it? And I think that's where we move from this like simplicity kind of search-based information capture world that we've lived in and, you know, cultivated by Google and others, to more of this like, this is like a collaborative utility that can almost be a thought partner that could really help us better think about how we want to serve.
I think it's interesting. I agree. And I actually love something you said there, which is a thought partner, because I think the other thing we want to watch out for is that we're replacing our own thought with, with AI, leveraging AI, like in our development process, for example, our software development process. We could get in a lot of trouble if we didn't actually understand or use our own brain in the development process and relied just on what AI was coming up with from a development. And I actually think that is just an example that covers across a lot of different things. And so one thing I would definitely encourage people is like, still use critical thinking when you're using these AI tools, and think of them that way. It's a thought partner, not a replacement for your own thought, because you are an expert in the thing that you're doing. And this can help unlock some additional scale and things like that. But it isn't a replacement for your expertise. That's more of an augmentation of your expertise. And so I really like that you said.
Well, before we wrap up, I'm kind of curious, like, is there a use case on how you use AI today that you feel like other leaders might learn from?
As you know, I still do some software development on the DonorDock product. I use it in those workflows, which of course is not going to be helpful to probably most of our audience, but I do find that it's very helpful there. I use it a lot of times, and I think this goes back to something you said. I use it a lot of times to vet things that I'm either thinking about, working on, or help me refine. Sometimes I find that I will have a thought and I'm having a hard time like articulating that thought the way that I want to. And so it becomes a really powerful tool to say, here's my thought. Help me refine this thought into something that's easier for me to explain to others, for example. And so I do think for a lot of leaders, that can be a challenge where it's like, okay, I know what I'm trying to say here. I'm not really sure the best way to say that or to get this across. I find it can be a really good thought partner there. And I think that could be helpful for other people as well.
And I'll just build on that. I think for me, it helps organize thoughts. I have a interesting brain and how it thinks, and I need sometimes help kind of taking this kind of like scattering of thoughts and resources, especially on morning walks, which is how I use it actually most often. Whereas I'll just go on a walk and just like talk about random thoughts and let my mind kind of go here and then go here and then go there and then go over here and then be like, oh, what about this? And what that then allows me to do is kind of say, okay, now can you take this cluster of thoughts and energy that I just threw out into the universe, and can you kind of like help me synthesize it and bring it back down into focus? Or even compartmentalize it, like, hey, you talked about 6 different areas of your life. Do you want me to organize them into those buckets? Whereas initially when I went out on that walk, they were all over the place. Yeah. And again, I think for me, it was awkward actually the first few times doing that, because you're just like talking to this like, somewhat imaginary thing. So I'm just exposing some of my insecurities about it.
Yeah.
But then I think when you start having these conversations and getting the feedback and then hearing it again and then giving more feedback and then having this, it can be extremely helpful as that partner.
Yep.
And really as like an internal thought partner that then allows me to, again, use that superpower to better communicate either more effectively or actually in a more expansive or generative way with my colleagues or with my partners that I work with. Even stuff that we do on this podcast. Like, it's like we have a topic, we have a seed, and we're like, okay, how do we expand this out? Like, what would be relevant to our audience, not just exciting for Matt and I to talk about? Like that's super helpful to really unpack as almost like a creative extension. And so that's how I'm using it today. But again, it's that embedded in my work where it's really helpful, not a replacement for my work.
I do a lot of the same with just like helping with content. We do a lot of webinars, things like that, being able to use the tools to help, again, kind of flesh out an idea into, a set of content. And then like I use it for some just like super practical things, like just analyzing contracts, for example. Like if I get sent a contract and, you try and read through a contract and it's all legalese and it's all, it's really hard to follow. And I'll upload that and I'll say, analyze this contract and let me know any red flags, anything that I need to be concerned about. And like things like that.
Totally.
It's not a lawyer, but it can do a pretty good job of like telling you like, hey, you should watch out for this clause in this contract. This is what this actually means. Is this what did you understand what this means? Like it can do a great job. I have a funny anecdotal story. So, my daughter, Caitlin, she just got engaged recently. And we went out actually last night to see a potential venue where they may have their wedding next year. And Caitlin is a lot like me. So she tends to move quickly and somewhat impulsively at times. And so this was the first place that she's looked at. And before we even left, she had decided that's where she wanted to have the wedding. So we got home and the person had sent her over all the information, including the contract for the venue. And before we'd even had dinner or anything with her and her fiance, she had signed the contract and had picked her date, which they'd kind of already picked the date. But it was just funny because I said to her, well, did you read the contract? She's like, well, I don't think it's really like a contract. I think it's just to hold the date. And I said, Caitlin, at the top, it says venue contract. But what I did is then I took Chat GPT and I uploaded it and said, tell us all the things we need to be thinking about with this contract. And so it was a very practical thing of being able to kind of outline it. But it was just funny. Sign the contract without actually reading it so that was a good life lesson for a 21-year-old. You should read contracts before you sign them.
You definitely should. How I've heard it defined is it's the smartest intern you'll ever have.
That's great.
But you would never let the intern make the decisions, right? Like looking at it maybe in a more positive light is I think it's almost like an analyst, right? It's like the analyst you probably could never afford at your nonprofit to basically say, hey, can you analyze this? Can you read this? Can you find the gaps? Can you do this? And I think, again, it goes back to we're moving into 2026 where I think creativity, curiosity, like willingness to learn new things, willingness to challenge, maybe like status quo. These are the qualities that I think as we move forward are going to be extremely important to your organization's, growth too, because it's going to be those that ask those questions and are able to kind of like work through complexity through questions in partnership, maybe with AI, but also your team, and how do you incorporate that in, which is going to increase the quality of your fundraising. And ultimately, like we talk a lot about in this, it's not so you can do more with less. We think that's really like a false trope where it's like, that's not what we're really after. We're just trying to focus on what matters most and do that with the highest quality and intention, because we know that that's what leads to the highest impact for your organization.
Yeah.
Not just more. And I do believe that AI can kind of be a part of helping to make that happen.
Yep. I also think, and I was listening to an expert talk about this the other day, and it really stuck with me. It is also an opportunity for us to really lean into things that are human and authentic, and that because of AI and just what that represents and where this will likely go, we will crave the human piece and the authentic human to human, that will become something we crave, which for a nonprofit, I think is a huge opportunity because it's going to represent an opportunity for us to have a set of donors who are craving that human, authentic relationship, meaning, purpose, and we can help provide that as nonprofits to our donors and to our constituents. So that's a whole nother byproduct that I see coming that I think will really benefit the nonprofit space pretty heavily over the next, number of years.
Absolutely. Well, Matt, thanks for sharing more about kind of our thinking around AI. And if we can be a partner further with you, or you have ideas or questions that surface from this episode, feel free to leave them in the comments. We're so grateful for those that do, because it allows us to be responsive and to evolve this for you all as we kind of come alongside you. So thanks again.
We also have a webinar coming up in December with some similar topics, and we'll put a link to to register for that. So we'd love to have you join us for that as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. See you next time.